have this forum to share some of the insights that we have, gathered over the, years of doing this work. And, just feel free if any of you have any questions or you want to jump in the chat and so on. So we shall comment without further ado. So the topic I like to share today is, why high performance prioritize sleep. Sleep like a CEO, right? Why high performers actually prioritize sleep. And when people talk about the work sleep, they often think in terms of wellness, right? People think about health. People think about, are they getting enough rest, right? But today, I like to elevate this idea a little bit further. Right? What if we reframe sleep as not just only a wellness topic, but rather, what if sleep is actually a performance-related topic? And the question is, what if one of the most powerful drivers of leadership effectiveness, decisions making quality, emotional resilience, and long-term performance is indeed something that we spend one-third of our lives doing? So my goal today for you is very simple. Right? I want to show you why some of the world's most successful leaders, athletes, and high performers don't just see sleep as a luxury, but rather they see it as a competitive advantage. Now, as we move higher in our careers, the nature of our work actually changes. Right? At the beginning of a career, we are basically paid to execute something. But as we grow and progress along our careers, we eventually become a leader. And as leaders, we are increasingly paid for judgment itself, right? Strategic decisions, resource allocations, we have to manage crisis, and we have to embark on difficult conversations. A single poor decision can potentially cost millions of dollars, damage trust, and derail years of progress. So the questions become, what determines the quality of our judgment? Well, most people think it's intelligence, or sometimes people think it's experience. But today, I want to argue that it's also about your biology. Leadership is often treated as a skill, right? But neuroscience actually tells us that it is also a biological function. As we know, to make sound decisions, we have to rely on your working memory, your emotional regulations, pattern recognitions, and also sound risk assessment. These are all not just abstract leadership concepts, but rather they are all related to our brain functions. And every one of them is profoundly influenced by sleep. When sleep declines, our decisions qualities inevitably will decline. Not because leaders become suddenly less intelligent or experienced, but because they can no longer consistently access their thinking at the very best. So allow me to take you through the different parts of the brain in order to dive into these conversations. Now, first up, I like to show you the CEO brain. Right? This area of the brain is what we call the prefrontal cortex. I often like to call this as a leadership brain. Right? This is where executive functionings actually happens. Strategic thinking, decisions making, impulse control, focus, judgment, and long-term planning. All of these are integrally related to our prefrontal cortex. Sleep deprivation significantly impacts activity in the prefrontal cortex. Research is showing us that one night of poor sleep itself can cause your CEO brain indeed to underperform by up to a whopping 30%. Now, in practical terms, this means that we become more impulsive. We focus on short-term gains and we make poor decisions, and we lose the ability to think strategically. A good night of sleep restores the very capabilities leaders are paid for. Next up, we move from a decisions making to emotional intelligence. Now, this part of the brain is called the amygdala. It is involved in threat detections and emotional processing. When sleep is adequate, what happens is the prefrontal cortex is going to regulate the amygdala. However, when sleep is inadequate, that regulation itself inevitably weakens. Science is telling us that emotional reactivity can increase by approximately 60% with just one night of poor sleep. So what happened to the leadership in this context? Well, less patience, more irritability, more emotional reactions, and more conflicts will ensue. Now, let's visit the learning brain or the hippocampus. This part of the brain is essential for learning and memory. It helps convert today's experience into tomorrow's knowledge and insights. Sleep is not passive. When we sleep, the brain is actively consolidating memories, integrating information, and strengthening learning pathway. This is why I often call learning happens during the day, but memory happens at night. Without sufficient sleep, people may attend training programs but retain far less than they could. One night of poor sleep can potentially reduce the performance of the learning brain by up to 40%. There is an important distinction between fatigue and tiredness. Fatigue is not the same as feeling sleepy. Fatigue is indeed reduced cognitive capacity. It is a reduction in your ability as leaders to think clearly, regulate emotions, maintain attention, and make good decisions. The challenge is when fatigue is being normalized, leaders adapt to it. They stop noticing it, but their performance continues to suffer. Many professionals are operating not at their full capacity or full potential because they've forgotten what feeling fully recovered actually feels like. Our research suggests that after approximately 17 hours of wakefulness, impairment is comparable to a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. In layman terms, this is equivalent to being half intoxicated. At around 20 hours mark of wakefulness, impairment can indeed approach 0.1%, which is equivalent to being legally drunk. Now imagine hiring a CEO and say, would you like to make critical decisions while being intoxicated? I'm sure nobody would accept this one. Yet, many organizations normalize fatigue every day. This is why fatigue is not just a comfort issue. It is indeed a risk issue to organizations. High performers are often rewarded for pushing harder. Unfortunately, work harder, being constantly available, responding faster. But eventually, effort without recovery becomes a liability. This is exactly what Arianna Huffington, the founder of the Huffington Post, talks about it in her book, The Sleep Revolutions. For years, our society glorified exhaustions. Arianna Huffington argues that exhaustion is not a badge of honor. On the contrary, it is a sign that the performance system is actually breaking down. Success doesn't come from sacrificing sleep. Success is sustained by protecting it. Elite athletes understand something many professionals overlook. Performance does not come from stress alone. Performance comes from stress followed by recovery. Training creates strain. Recovery creates adaptations. Adaptations creates performance. The same principle applies to leaders. Meetings, deadlines, traveling, decisions making, these are all forms of stress. Now, the questions to you is not whether we experience stress. The question is how well we recover from it. One of the most fascinating sleep studies actually come from Dr. Cherry Ma at the Stanford University. She worked with elite basketball players, and when they increased their sleep durations, performance improved significantly. Just 1 hour of increase in the average sleeping hours durations indeed increased long-range shooting accuracy by a whopping 9%. Our reaction times improved by around 12%. At elite levels, improvements are extremely difficult to achieve. Yet, sleep produces measurable gains. This is why I often call sleep the world's most underutilized performance enhancer. Many elite athletes prioritize sleep and recovery with extraordinary discipline. Look at the gentleman on your left, Roger Federer, one of the greatest tennis players of all time, reportedly slept around 11 to 12 hours, including naps during tournaments. In fact, Roger Federer doesn't really want to talk about it openly when he was still actively playing because he knew that this is indeed one of his most powerful secret weapons that he doesn't want his competitors to know about. Now, Usain Bolt, who is one of the fastest men in the world, famously took a nap and woke up just 30 minutes before the finals of the Olympic. And guess what? Not only did he manage to get the gold medal, but he also broke the Olympic record. So you notice something very interesting here. The greatest athletes in the world do not treat recovery as optional. They treat it as part of the performance. Corporate professionals often admire elite athletes, but few actually adopt the recovery habits that support elite performance. I love this quote from Jeff Bezos because it perfectly captures the business case for sleep. Jeff Bezos doesn't sleep because he has spare time. He sleeps because his decisions matter. He understands that leadership is ultimately a decisions-making profession, and his goal is not to make more decisions, but rather to make better decisions. This is exactly what sleep supports: clarity, judgment, strategic thinking, emotional regulations, the very qualities that separate great leaders from the average ones. Now, let's make this a practical session. Many people leave sleep talks feeling inspired, but inspirations without implementation changes nothing. This is why I have developed a proprietary lead framework. Lead actually help us to identify where recovery capacity is leaking, and with that clear identifications, we can then prescribe very specific strategic interventions that can close the gap. So very quickly, L in the leads model actually stands for load. We're really talking about emotional as well as cognitive carryover. E stands for environment, especially when it relates to your sleep environment itself. A is actually alignment. Alignment here in this case, we're actually talking about two major systems. One is the C system, which is a circadian rhythm. The other one is an S system, the sleep pressure system. D is about disruptors. We're talking about substances and things that can actually affect the quality or ability to fall asleep. Things like caffeine, alcohol, and so forth. And finally, R is about recovery capacity. Right? You can think about lead as a diagnostic lens. Rather than asking why am I not sleeping well? We can ask, where is recovery breaking down? And then take the proactive actions to actually close it. Let me leave you with one practical actions for each category under leads itself. Now for load, yeah, you can think about a brain dump, a strategy about brain dump before bed by writing down all the unfinished tasks and the next actions. And in doing so, it will allow your brain the permissions to stop working and it feel ready to fall asleep. For environment, I like to apply the sleep cave principles. That is to make your room dark, cool, and quiet, just like a cave. For alignment, one of the things that we can do is to get some natural morning sunlight within the first hour of waking up. Now, bear in mind that sleep actually starts in the morning, not just at night. For disruptors, you may want to consider create a caffeine curfew. Right? Many people underestimate how long caffeine remains active. It has a shelf half-life of 6 hours, which imagine the kind of impact it's going to have if you have caffeine intake during later part of the day and how long it's going to stay in your system. Finally, for recovery, we would treat fatigue as data, right? Not weakness. When fatigue appears, we don't simply push harder, but rather we ask ourselves what recovery signal your body is actually sending. Now, this may all appear to be small interventions, but done consistently, the effects will compound and deliver big results for you. If there's one message I hope you'll remember today, it will be this: sleep is not a luxury. Sleep is not just a reward. It's not something we do when our work is finished. Sleep is indeed one of the foundations that allows great work to happen in the first place. Every leader wants better decisions, greater resilience, higher performance, better relationships, more sustainable success. Sleep supports all of them. I would like to close with a thought inspired by Ariana Huffington. For decades, we've been told that success requires sacrificing sleep, but perhaps we have it backwards. Leaders who thrive over the long term are not the ones who work the longest. Rather, they're the ones who recover the best. Because
Halfway
now that
through.
was a very good That was a very good presentation, Kitty. And I noticed significant amount of uh, key messages that we both try to deliver here. Obviously, we didn't prepare the presentation content together, right? But it seems like there's significant amount of alignment in terms of how we look at this. And I noted a few things that you talk about. While I was listening to you, definitely I'm not sleeping. I definitely listen to you very attentively. And a few things that I like to highlight, and I think that I strongly echo with you as well. First thing is
Mm,
about this thing about normalized fatigue. Right? When
mm,
people, fatigue becomes almost habitual to them. So,
mm,
people normalize it and they think that they operate, as usual, but whereas in fact, there's a steady but gradual decline in terms of their
mm,
decision-making ability, in terms of their judgment,
mm,
and then the quality of their leadership and so forth actually decline over time without people even realizing. I think that is actually the most worrying part, right? If you know that you're actually declining, then you can take steps to
yeah,
fix it. But if you do
yeah,
not know and you believe that you're still operating normally, just like we normalize fatigue itself, and that to me
yeah,
is danger, right? Especially from
yeah.
a leadership perspective. So that's one thing I noticed from you. Um, you ended up with this thing about the message about recovery is not just the opposite of high performance. In fact, it actually supports that. Right?
Mm,
Recovery is
mm,
actually the foundations of high performance. I would even argue on that. So I'm really glad that we are so in line in that
mm,
regards. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That will be my thoughts. And this thing about recovery is not just physical and also psychological.
Oh, definitely. It's many people. I think it's just how again how our society is based, and many people don't even talk about just openly. First of all, everyone is just pushing through and trying to reach a certain level, a certain goal, and
That's
without
right.
thinking of themselves at the first place and how you're going to sustain your performance for a long time, especially when you're building something big, when the pillars are not being taken care of.
Mm,
So it's not even like such a crazy amount of work, but I really truly believe that we need to understand first why we function like that. And once we have that breakthrough, and then we can start in working towards your goals, because there is it's always possible, there's always a possible way to function better and in a lot healthier way. Just like I mentioned, even though I did learn a lot pushing through, people pleasing a lot, it was always, for me hard to say no in the past. Um, and I did learn a lot that way, but
sure.
that's not the healthiest way. So you can still reach your goals. And that's what I think many people don't realize, that you
Mm,
can reach your goals, but not in a way that you sacrifice so much of yourself.
absolutely.
And so that's why I love working with people and helping them. And unfortunately, up until this day, it's still not really widely talked about it, because everyone is just so focused on their individual performance, and make it happen, and just keep them pushing through those hard times
Yeah,
or easy times. And yeah, for me, again, like I said, people pleasing has been a big thing. And but because I've been struggling a lot with that, I never got to do my job.
mm,
So I was moving very slowly towards my goal,
mm,
because all my time went to the people around me and not to my actual goal in the end. um, it's just something, it's really fascinating, and I really hope later in the future, more people will realize how important it is to take care of the recovery part of your
sure. I actually
journey.
see one, Kitty. Amani wanted to ask some questions. So, Amani, you can actually, unmute yourself if you want, or you can type it in the chat.
You.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, you were saying that a lot of the amygdala is very active, and that disrupts sleep and because of obsessive thinking. But do you feel this is actually very particular to founders or high achievers in general, that they're wired in a way where their thoughts, they have a more obsessive nature, let's say, in which they're unable to switch off their nervous system in order to get that, or at least, I mean, in my case, I can fall asleep, but my sleep maintenance is gone. I'm within 2 or 3 hours, I'm wide awake again.
Yeah, thank you, Amani, for the. Maybe I would yeah, when I was explaining about the amygdala, which is the emotional brain itself, in the context of how it actually impacts, sleep deprivation actually impacts both the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala itself. Not so much in terms of in relations to the quality of the sleep, how deep you sleep and all that, but I was trying to give a comparison. Let's just say, a poor night's sleep itself. If you look at on the leadership context, there are really two things. Right? If you imagine the prefrontal cortex just like the brake, where you have the impulse control, right? To really regulate emotions and so on. And you imagine your amygdala, it's just like accelerator, for example. Like, assuming you're driving downhill and all that, right? You have an accelerator, and at the same time you have a brake. Now, in one night of poor sleep, right? The brake actually underperforms, potentially can underperform by up to 30%. At the same time, you're actually accelerating by another 60%. So in the leadership context, you think about it, people talk about emotional regulations, right? Emotional regulation. Just imagine if you're driving downhill when you're accelerating 60% and your brake is not performing by up to 30%. What kind of potential disaster that can happen? Right? Emotional
Can't.
regulations. Yeah. Yeah, it's likely going to be a crash and so on, right? This is why people like, if you look at the science of EQ, for example, emotional intelligence, right? People always like to allude to somebody like Daniel Goleman and people like that. But if you look at the theory of Daniel Goleman itself, it really looks at this thing called the emotional hijack. We talk about emotional hijack, and that has a lot to do with neuroscience perspective. Right? Emotional hijack is in a normal case where you are properly slept, and you are properly recalibrated, because sleep is so crucial for the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Right? It's a time when it really recalibrates. So you have the balance, you have the impulse control and all that. But in a sleep deprived environment, your prefrontal cortex is not able to properly rested, right? And it's not properly recalibrated. And therefore, anything that comes in will bypass that, go straight to your amygdala, which is the emotional brain, right? You become very, very emotionally volatile and all that. And therefore you just say something small, you can just explode and say something really foolish and all that, and disrupt the team dynamics. You really hurt people unnecessarily. You say things that really doesn't make a lot of sense from the team dynamics perspective. Just to give you an example, uh, you know,
I have 3 kids, so done it. I know
oh
exactly what you
yeah,
mean.
oh yeah, yeah. Imagine if you don't sleep well, the kids come in and mommy, just a
Oh yeah.
small request, suddenly you may just explode. Yeah, that's a good example. Amani, exactly. Yeah, but in the leadership context, that would translate into poorer team morale, team, dynamics and so forth. So just to give you a bit of example, that I'm talking in relation to that context. Yeah.
But what about things like physicians or surgeons that operate on very little sleep and require very high levels of concentration to perform?
I,
Do
I
they?
really like your questions. Yeah. I
Do
really
they?
like your questions. Yeah.
Thank
This is
you.
this is amazing. You're really spot on, Amani. That's something that I really advocate. Now, remember I shared in the slides, this thing about being sleep deprived, the cost of wakefulness, right? Prolonged wakefulness. If you're being consistently awake for 17 hours, it is equivalent to 0.05% of blood alcohol level, which means
Yeah.
that in layman terms, this is actually you are literally, half intoxicated. Now, I have friends who are into, medical schools, and they are trained to like work consistently for like 30 hours and so.
Mhm.
So if you look at the neuroscience, anything 20 and beyond is almost like you're intoxicated, right? The effects is similar to 0.1% blood alcohol level, which means you're actually intoxicated. So I ask you these questions, right? Would you want to have your loved one, right, going through, let's say, a brain surgery by a surgeon who tells you that, look, I've not slept for 24 hours, but it's okay. I have enough caffeine in my system. I can sustain.
Yeah.
Would you want to do that?
Yeah.
Chances are you don't want to, right?
Depends on the person.
I'll be very scared to do that,
It
right? If
depends
my
on how
pilot
can you
tells
get
me,
rid of.
yeah, if I tell my pilots, if I am board a plane and then my pilot say, look, I have not slept for 24 hours, 36 hours. But it's okay, I have, it's a disaster in the making, if you ask me, right? In a context of leadership as well, right? Somebody who is so sleep deprived, and you're making, let's say you're making major, M&A decisions, right? You're going to underestimate the risk that you're taking, and you're going to be over optimistic, right? The science is telling us very, very clearly. Look at the case of the Challenger, the Space Shuttle Challenger, right? When they actually launched it, the engineers knew that conditions are really not suitable for the launch of the space shuttles, but they decided to go ahead. Why?
Yeah.
The Roger Commission did the investigation and realized that most of those engineers or critical decisions maker, they are severely sleep deprived. It's like less than 2 hours. And in conditions like that, the mind is just not sound enough to make good decisions, right? Your prefrontal cortex, remember we talk about prefrontal cortex being the judgment center, decisions making, rational thinking, it's malfunctioning, right? Malfunctioning. And therefore they make those critical decisions that resulted in all 7 astronauts on board, you know, perish.
Yeah.
73 seconds, right? I can name you many other examples as well, the Chernobyl, Exxon Valdez case, and so on and so forth. Same thing, right? Leaders who make decisions when they are severely sleep deprived, right? Which is why you look at somebody in the totally opposite, people like Jeff Bezos, right? He knew it. He prioritized 8 hours of sleep, right? If you look at his schedule, he will make decisions early in the morning, and if it's towards middle of the afternoon or end of afternoon, he would defer decisions because he knew that it's not going to be good decisions that he's going to make. He would tell his team, he said, "Look, let's call it a day. Let's decide tomorrow." That's how he protect his sleep. Yeah,
That's actually really fascinating that the decisions were made in the morning.
absolutely.
Um, but do people have like innate different circadian rhythms? Some people fare well on 6 hours of sleep and some need 10, for instance.
Good
Is there
question.
variability in that?
Maybe Kitty will add on to this, but from the that I'm sure you're aware of this different type of chronotypes, right? You can
Yeah.
actually take a test and all that, right? Now some people they are naturally early birds, right? They'll wake up, like 5 o'clock, and then they'll do like some people that's about 25%. Then they have another 25%. These are all the late people, right? They
Yes.
slept late and then they wake up late, but their function, the circadian rhythm is different. And then
Yeah.
there's another 50% people like myself who fall in the middle and all that thing. So circadian rhythm is important. I think you highlighted a very important point. Sometimes people, we unnecessarily give people the wrong labeling, right? They call them lazy, they didn't wake up, but that's not always true, right? That's because of their circadian rhythm. They have different chronotypes. So we have to respect their chronotypes when it comes to, people with different, you know, different dispositions, if you like. Yeah, maybe Kitty,
Mhm.
you want to add something in that regards? You have doing work with people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, what I know of that genes are also playing a big role in that because based on your birth already, it can already be decided because I'm a morning person specifically, but I know people also, that they're more of a night person. And yeah, like Dr. Tan said, there are people, of course, they're functioning with, like 4 or 5 hours and they find it that's their normal and they do manage,
Yeah.
like that way. Although, like I said, I couldn't be Roger Federer because for me, 9 hours is, my personal preference. But, like you said, also you have 3 kids and, and that's very hard to juggle in between, like doing your business and raising your kids because your kids will not care about your rhythm
Yeah.
and your routine. So for you, you yeah, that's a completely different, again, just like Dr. Tim mentioned, when it comes to leadership, and then because also in most leadership roles, there are still men, right? And women are still figure out, what works, especially when you have the kids. So that's again a different kind of support needed, I believe. So um, it's just hard. And I think many people don't even recognize, I'm talking mostly for your case, because that's something I can also, very much relate to. That you are ending up
Yeah.
in a phase of your life that you get to know yourself in a way that you never, and you become someone you don't even recognize anymore. And and you need to just to deal with that factor as well, and then work out what works for everybody, but most important for you, because yeah, if you're not regulated, not being able to emotionally regulate yourself, it's going to affect again your children and your company. So yeah, I believe that, I think women would definitely could benefit, as a little like side gig kind of support in that case. But yeah, I think in this case, just like Dr. Tan said, I believe it's really there. Yeah, these types of people, like who's enough, yeah, they can function, with 5 hours.
Yeah.
They can, and or they must need 8 hours of sleep. And that's just something, what you need. I believe. I think everyone knows by this age, like talking about more the uh, adult people around, but the youngsters, still need to kind of find their own way, what works for them and what doesn't, and where they need support as well. Some people, I believe, can do it without support, but I think the majority of founders and CEOs definitely needed that kind of support. Maybe Jeff Bezos had one. I didn't read into his life, and he just like, yeah, I figured it out. But yeah, maybe there was some help behind it. I will look into that later
For
because
sure. I'm sure he has a sleep
I'm sure. Yeah,
therapist,
yeah, yeah,
For
yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah. And now he's just spreading the words out
Yeah.
there. It's like, guys, you need to do this and that. Yeah, I mean, it works, right? So yeah, I have someone else as well join. Okay. Okay, well, for the last minute, but do you have any question, any or anyone else at this point? And
I mean, I have a million questions, but please, I want
oh,
everyone to enjoy that. This is fascinating.
cool. Then, like, yeah, you can find us, me easily
I'll
and Dr.
message you.
Tomo. So,
Yeah.
and just feel free to pop a message there, and
Cool.
yeah, we will have a chat with Dr. Ton as well.
That's
Maybe
amazing.
uh, do another session later down the line. So
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah,
Really
I think
thank
one of the biggest challenge that I think working with leaders and all that is about this mindset that sleep is still largely perceived as a downtime. Right? I think that is one very critical barrier that we have to overcome. But if you really look into the science, I'm an entrepreneur. I always like to think in terms of the return on investment. Right? I really like to think in terms of return on investment, and I think there is no I wouldn't say there's no, but if you really look into the science, right, in terms of the benefits that you can derive, right, both cognitively, physically, as well as emotionally, right? Today we only speak because of time constraint, we only talk about a very specific aspect of self, but sleep is also immense when it comes to problem solving, creativity, things like that, right? In the leadership context, this is absolutely critical, right? If you invest just that, remember the example of just 1 hour of extra sleep, right? The long range shooting range actually increased by 12 or 9% rather. But in an ultra competitive world, this could be a difference between winning and losing, right? Between winning and losing. Today, in the AI environment, right? Everybody is talking about AI. Everybody is talking about leveraging AI, for success and all these things. But how about leverage sleep as a strategic asset, right? Very few people, I think EKT will probably agree with me as well, right? Very few people, right? They
Yeah.
think in terms of that. I think this is one of the most powerful tools when it comes to performance enhancement. And why are we not leveraging enough, especially as leaders? And the good thing is, it is also free, right? It doesn't cost you, right? You just sleep. You don't need to go to the gym, sign up for membership. You don't need to invest in supplements and stuff. You can just. I see sleep as a mini vacations. I really do. Right? Every night I look forward to it. I enjoy it. I like it. Yeah, and I never stinge myself. I always think that the 1 hour extra that I put in, it's gonna give me so much more return. I become a better person. I'm more emotionally resilient. I can solve problem more creatively. I have better leadership qualities. I have better decisions making ability and so forth. Right. And I'm being really truthful to that. And the other thing I want to mentioned before, probably, and it's also about technology. Right? I think Kitty and I we will talk about this a little bit as well. Right? Technology nowadays with all the sleep science, with all the CBTIs, you name it, all that kind of stuff. There's also technology coming along, right, to help us to achieve that deep restorative sleep as well. So maybe you want to look out for some of those solutions. I myself, particularly, I'm very much into sound frequency technology, right? As in moving the brainwave from the beta state, which is what we are operating right now, all the way to alpha, theta, and eventually to delta, which is where you have the slow wave sleep, right? And I benefited a lot from that. So maybe we have another sessions another time to talk about this, Kitty. Enough of this. I think we had a really, really good sessions, Kitty. Yeah. Over to you. You want to conclude?
No, thank you so much. Yeah, it's just funny that that's why I really love being in contact with Dr. Tan, because he's more of a technology guy, and I approach the same issues from a completely different angle, from working with the subconscious mind without the technology, just you and me, pretty much. And it's just fascinating always. Like, there's so many options and solutions out there, and someone is more leaning towards the science part, someone wants more of the human connection side, and everyone can just decide what works for them, right? So, but yeah, but that's pretty much it. Of course, and I would be happy to join and hop on a call in the future, so, and discuss the same things but a little bit and deeper, because now we just went through kind of the surface things. And yeah, but no, then thank you so much for pretty much everyone, even the last joiner, to hop on the call. And yeah, we're just gonna finish up, and I wish you a great day, everybody. And yeah, hope I see you soon.
Thank you so much. Look forward to the next sessions.
Bye.
Bye.